Assassins, to another episode of the Dark Assassins podcast, the show that dives deep into not just technology, but the concepts, software, and procedures behind it all, and explains it so simply that even your grandma can understand it. As always, I'm your host, the Dark Assassin. You know, the funny thing about this episode is I was working on recording the New Year's special episode. Yes, I know I recorded these out of order, but it ballooned to the point where it spilled over into the Christmas special and further ballooned even more into this episode. So this episode is going to be a hybrid of sorts. It's still going to have your regularly scheduled programming, like the trivia question, the nerdy things, and the cybersecurity tip. But for the next 2 weeks, it's going to be more of a special type of a thing. Now, personally, I don't really like when shows or podcasts basically re-air pre-canned like episodes from the past. Like they'll just pick an episode at random and be like, yep, this looks good, we'll just play this one again. I'm never really a huge fan of that. Now, don't get me wrong. It's great if you, say, are new to the podcast and you haven't heard that episode before. But if you're a diehard listener, it's like, I've already heard this one. I don't really feel like hearing it again. So I didn't want to do that. So instead, what I decided to do was go back through all of the previous 140 episodes of the podcast. Yeah, I know we've had quite a number of them, and try to identify some of my favorite moments, whether that was because I thought they were funny, I thought they were insightful, or for some other reason I thought they were kind of iconic, or I just otherwise liked them. Now, granted, I probably missed a fair number of them, even though it's basically ended up being a 3-hour-long supercut. So I have divided it up into 3 chunks. We'll get the first part today, the second part next week, and the third the week after that. Now, if I missed any of them, please, by all means, let me know which ones I missed and what your favorite clip and or segment was from the podcast. And maybe in a future episode where we kind of do one of these supercuts, I can do one from the audience's perspective rather than my own perspective. So with that preamble out of the way, let's get into this week's trivia question. So in the context of cloud computing, what does HPC stand for? So what does HPC stand for? And that is your trivia question for the week. Now, before we get into the cybersecurity tip, I just wanted to give a quick business proposition. So I know I have bashed and hated on web developers in the past and clowned on JavaScript, but I want to reach out to you with an olive branch today. My business opportunity for you is a web application, kind of like a Zillow, Redfin, or some other like home searching type application, but for homelabbers. So one of the things that Zillow and those other types of websites severely lack is accommodations for homelabbers. And what do I mean by this? Well, sure, you can have a basement filter. I mean, a basement is pretty clutch if you want to have a home lab because you can just throw it down in the basement. It's generally fairly climate controlled, and you can close the door to the basement and you don't have to hear your server rack blowing all the time. So that is a big plus. But what they often don't include are filters for a dedicated server room. Do they have Ethernet cable run through the house? These kinds of things that a home labber would love to have in a home, they just don't really have filters for them, which is quite annoying. And if you're thinking I'm being a little I don't know what the term is, but if you're thinking that like you're being like so needy, like why do you need something to be able to filter based on if something has a server room? You can filter for offices. Like if you want an office in your new place, you can do that as a search filter. And if you think about it, what are offices in like 99%, well, maybe not 99, but like 90% of use cases, what are offices aside from spare bedrooms, if we're being honest with ourselves? Because at my place right now, that is literally all my office is. It's just the second bedroom that I'm obviously not using, which also happens to serve as my server room, which also happens to serve as like my dedicated storage place because my house has no storage. But these are the kinds of things that I'm thinking of, when it comes to a home labber. They would be kind of looking for these things, like does the place have a server room? What kind of electrical outlets are there? Does it have, the types of outlets that would be required to run a massive rack? Things like this that your average home buyer probably isn't looking for or caring about, but a home labber definitely would. So this is, I think, a golden opportunity, and I think I'll just leave it with Han Solo, what his quote was. If you don't take up this business opportunity.
You're throwing away a fortune here. Don't be a fool.
Very well said, Han. I couldn't have said it any better myself. So with that, let's get into this week's cybersecurity tip. This week's cybersecurity tip is to always confirm your email address senders before doing anything with the email. Now, I know we've had this kind of as a tip in various ways before, whether it was like for phishing or something like that. But it came up again because I got a very convincing email, or at least very convincing looking anyway, email from Coinbase this week in regards to an issue with my account. So the email looked very official. And it was basically requesting info to unlock my account. But the other thing of it too was like when I got the email in my inbox, when it gives like the name of who sent it, it said no reply, which gave it a little bit of credibility because usually when you get these kind of automated emails from legit reasons for like updating account information or things like that, it's usually from a no reply email. So it was a little more convincing, but then as soon as I actually looked at who sent the email, the actual email address, it all fell apart very quickly. Because first off, it wasn't a no reply email. They just, I guess, spoofed the name to say no reply because the before the pre-pending like username was like info, I think, and then I don't even remember what the actual domain of it was, but it was not Coinbase or anything close to it. So immediate red flags. So that went directly into the trash. But if I had any doubt that maybe something was up with my Coinbase account, what I would have done, and I did actually do this, log into my Coinbase account for other reasons, but log into the account to see if anything is up. And that has always been my recommendation for you, is if you get an email that you're not 100% sure if it's legit from your bank, from some account that you have, e-commerce site, whatever the case may be, if you get some email like asking you for information or to log in for X, Y, and Z reasons, never click any of the links in the email itself and go directly to the site that is requesting said information and log in directly. Because if there's something that you actually need to do, it will without a doubt appear either as a notification when you log in your dashboard, or however the site you're logging into handles those kinds of things. So yeah, always make sure you're verifying the sender of emails before you click on links. And even if you do verify the sender of emails, you still should be verifying the links before you just, blindly click on them. And that is your cybersecurity tip for the week. So moving right into what nerdy stuff have I been up to this week? Now, while I didn't get up to, necessarily a ton of nerdy things, I did get sidetracked because while I was doing a lot of fantastic things, not necessarily many of them I would really consider nerdy things. Case in point, the podcast. Most of my free time outside of work has been recording these 3 episodes and compiling the core modules, I guess is what we're calling it. Although I think when I was actually recording it, I kind of switched between like greatest hits and iconic moments or something like that. I don't know. But I wanted to make sure that you guys were covered for both this week as well as next week with Christmas and New Year's the following week. But with that said, I still did get up to a couple of nerdy things. The first thing that I got up to was I nuked my old Mac Mini. I didn't actually blow it up, but I essentially did because I completely wiped it and installed Catalina. So previously I had Sonoma running on it, and I don't know, basically what happened was it tried to like pre-download an update, which caused the root patches to like get uninstalled, and it was very sluggish and slow. Graphics acceleration was gone. I couldn't update it because there wasn't enough space on the drive, and I didn't want to upgrade to Sequoia, and it was already kind of slow because, it hasn't been supported since Catalina, so yeah. So I just decided to just get rid of Sonoma and go back to Catalina, and it is a night and day difference, let me tell you. It not only is, it's basically faster in every regard. Not only do applications open insanely fast, like previously with Sonoma, even though the applications were all installed on an SSD, when I would open them for the first time, it was like I was trying to open them off a hard drive. I don't know why they were so slow, but they were. And then as soon as I switched back to Catalina, it was like instantaneous. Like not as fast as, my M4 Mac Mini, M4 Pro Mac Mini, but it is noticeably faster. Like we're not talking like it's going to take like 30 seconds plus to open the app. It's like maybe 5 tops. Like it's fairly snappy. But that's not where it ends, though, because while, yes, basically everything with the operating system runs smoother, which should honestly make sense to you because this, of course, was the last officially supported operating system for this Mac Mini. And if Apple's going to ship an operating system that is officially supported, it should run pretty well. And if it's not officially supported, that's in theory because it doesn't run very well, theoretically anyway. That's kind of the very high level cookie cutter explanation. It obviously goes a lot deeper than that, but for high level purposes, we'll just keep with that definition. But not in addition to everything just kind of being snappier, it also compiles code quicker as well. So if you'll recall back to the Mac Mini episode when I got my M4 Pro Mac Mini and did the compiling comparisons, the 2012 Mac Mini compiled my video game in around 16 seconds or so. It was like 16 seconds and change. But with the downgrade to Catalina, it consistently does it multiple seconds faster every single time. Like I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head because I didn't write them down. I probably should have, but it was somewhere in the ballpark, I think, I was seeing between like 12 and 14 seconds versus 16. So, like 2 to 3 second difference in compile time is fairly decent. It's not gonna, set the world on fire. It's still slower than my Mac Pro, DTK, and M4 Pro Mac Mini, but a gain is a gain. So that was what I got up to there. That was pretty fun. But I also did get some updates to my video game too, And the past couple weeks, I've been talking about working on the config file and kind of getting the configuration options set so you can have a human-readable configuration file that you can set things like what screen resolution you want, what you want your key mappings to be, and that kind of stuff. But I had been kind of hesitant on the key mapping part because I wasn't fully sure on how I wanted to go about doing that. So the solution I settled on was making a function that basically using a function pointer rather to point to the various setter functions so I don't have to do a massive if-else tree when reading in the config file. And that worked pretty good. But I was stuck on how I wanted to implement the keyboard portion of it because I wanted to make it human readable, but also make it easy for the program to digest as well without a very complicated, complex solution. So I believe I touched on in last week's episode that my solution was going to be a map where I essentially mapped the keyboard key, the name of the key from the keyboard key's enum. So for instance, the letter A on your keyboard is specified as key_A. So the string would be key_A, and then the value would be the enum value, which would just be key_A, but not a string, if that makes sense. And then you'd have the reverse as well, where you could give it the keyboard key enum value, and it would give you back the string value. So you could easily read in the string value and get the keyboard key value, and then similarly you could give it the keyboard key value and get the string, so when you're writing that data to the config file. And that worked pretty good, but there was a problem because I am very lazy, as you guys know, and I like to automate things. So the manual process of making this dictionary/map by hand was not going to fly for me, because not only would I have to do it once, but I'd have to do it twice, because you have the keyboard keys to string and then the string to the keyboard keys, so you'd have to kind of reverse them, and it was not going to work. So I decided to just write a Python script to generate those variables for me, and it worked beautifully. So what I did was I wrote a script to, like I said, auto-generate these map variables for me. So how it works is I take in the raylib.h header file as input. So I have the path hard-coded for where the file should be based on the current directory structure. But I also allow you to pass it in as a variable if you so choose, as a command line argument. So you can do it that way as well. And basically how it works is it parses the header file until it finds the keyboard key's enum, and then it strips out everything aside from the name. So it finds key_A, saves that off, finds key_B, saves that off, and so on. And then when it finds those key values, it basically creates both of the map pairing. So it creates the string value and the keyboard key enum value, and then the keyboard key enum value and the string value, and then goes to the next one. And then it goes until it gets to the end of the enum, and then it just breaks out and then returns the result, and then prints to the screen the variable with Doxygen documentation all ready to go, so I can just copy it and paste it into my C++ file. So it worked fantastically. And the reason why I kind of wanted to do this auto-generated format with it was because in the unlikely event that the raylib.h file either changes the key scheme, or so instead of saying key_A, they change it to like keyboard key_A or something like that. That'd be kind of long, but I mean, I guess they could in theory do it. But say they did something like that, or they added a new keyboard key value to the enum or removed one or something like that, I could just rerun the script and it would print out the updated variables for me, and I wouldn't have to worry about tediously checking, line by line to making sure everything's up to date. I can just run the script and within less than a second have the variables fully updated with any new potential changes. So fantastic. I'm definitely very happy with that little side project to get it up and working. And then once I got that going, I did test to confirm that reading and writing from the config file worked with the keyboard values, and you were able to set them, and did have at least a little bit of implementation actually in the game itself, doing some testing with changing some of the keyboard key values by just updating the config file, and that worked pretty great. So we definitely made some good progress there. So those were some of the nerdy things that I got up to, and as promised, without further ado, let's get into some of those core modules, or kind of my greatest hits, I thought, from the history of the Dark Assassins podcast. So let's get into that right now. So the first clip I want to revisit is one from our first year of the podcast, episode 19, titled "The Most Elite Breed of Developers and How to Be Like Them." And not to spoil anything, I'll just let myself from the past tell you a little bit more about that. Another way that you can do debugging is what's called rubber duck debugging, which, yes, this is a real thing. I have a link in the show notes below that you can go check it out. So I'm going to read the steps through the methods of rubber duck debugging. So step number 1, according to rubberduckdebugging.com, step number 1 is beg, borrow, steal, buy, fabricate, or otherwise obtain a rubber duck. Bathtub variety. This is key. You have to make sure it's of the bathtub variety. If it's not, they're not the elite rubber ducks that are the master coders. Step 2 is to place the rubber duck on desk and inform it that you're just going over some code with it, if that's all right. Because obviously you don't want to inconvenience the duck, because the duck is a very busy duck and is, in charge of, tons of code and is a master developer, and you don't want to necessarily inconvenience it or bore it with your failures as a developer. So you want to make sure that it is okay to debug with it, because remember, you have to get consent. You need the answer yes, which ironically the rubber duck won't actually respond to you, but it's more of a convenience thing of asking it. So step number 3 is to explain to the duck what your code is supposed to do, then go into detail explaining your code line by line. So the point is, then step 4, and which goes right into step 4, which is at some point you will tell the duck what you're doing next and realize that it's not in fact what you are actually doing. The duck will sit there sincerely, happily in the knowledge that it helped you on your way. So like I said, you'll as you go through your code line by line, you'll figure out what you did wrong, and the rubber duck was just there, happy to help. So it also says, as a note, in a pinch, a coworker might be able to substitute for the duck. However, it's often preferred to confine mistakes to the duck instead of your coworker, right? Because you obviously don't want your coworker to know that you're an idiot and can't understand how to write your programs. So it's better to confine in the duck rather than a coworker. The next clip I want to talk about, or I guess revisit, is one from our networking episode. So probably one of the proudest episodes that I've ever done on this podcast was during the first year of the podcast. It was episode 27. It was called The Hardware That Runs the Internet. And it was going into a real deep dive into all the various components that not only make up the internet, but data centers as a whole, going into the various types of network connectors, types of Ethernet cables, fiber cables, power over Ethernet, the different speeds of switches, and all kinds of really good stuff. So it's one of my favorite episodes that I did, and I would highly encourage you all to go back and listen to it if you haven't already. But one of my favorite clips from that episode, which I'm going to play for you now, is I did a comparison of how quickly each one of the various switches would be able to download GTA 5, assuming they were able to exceed their maximum, speed. So, for instance, some switches that had, like 200 gigabits per second ports, how quickly could you download GTA 5 at 200 gigabits per second? So, take it away, previous me. Here at the Dark Assassins podcast, we believe that context matters. So, you're probably wondering what all this means. We talked about a lot of numbers, gigabits per second, a lot of different variants of that. But what does any of that mean? So I'm here today to provide you context. So back in college, me and my friends like to compare our internet speeds by determining how fast, which I guess more accurately, since we were in college, how slow it would be to download GTA 5. So GTA 5 is going to be our benchmark for these speeds. So GTA 5 is about 95 gigabytes in size. Now, for this speed comparison, we have to make some assumptions here. So we essentially are assuming perfectly optimal conditions with no bottlenecks whatsoever. So this means there's no slowdown in network speeds. There's no processing on your computer that makes the speed of the download go slower. You're able to write at the speed that you're downloading at, which for context, I don't know if there's really anything consumer grade that can write at 400 gigabits per second, but it is what it is. I guess if you had super duper fast RAM and you had enough RAM, you maybe could have it saved all to RAM and then moved over to disk later. I don't know. But for the sake of this, we're just assuming that everything is optimal, everything works perfectly, there's no bottlenecks, no nothing. So with that in mind, my college dorm had 30 megabits per second. Now, personally, I think that's kind of generous. It was generally a lot slower than that. But assuming that 30 megabits per second internet, it would take 8.5 hours to download GTA 5, which kind of makes sense because from what I recall originally downloading it, it was a start the download, then go to bed, because I think it was 12 or 13 hours is what Steam was saying it would take to download. So it's kind of in the same ballpark if you factor in, various network slowdowns and bottlenecks and, real world stuff. That's kind of about accurate. Now, let's take the average home internet speed of someone in the United States. Now, generally, from what I could gather, that's around 100 megabits per second. You obviously have the people that are more urban that have, the gigabit speeds and, the much faster speeds. And then you have the people out in the middle of nowhere that have, the satellite internet that get maybe 25 megabits per second. So average it out, sort of 100 megabytes per second. We're just going to go with that. So if you had that internet speed, it would take just over 2 hours to download GTA 5. Now, if we get into the SFP realm with these speeds, at 1 gigabit per second, it would take about 12 minutes to download GTA 5. So pretty quick compared to the 8.5 hours for the 30 megabits per second and the 2 hours for the average home internet speed in the U.S. Now, if we move up to 10 gigabits per second, that would take just over a minute. So we're getting pretty quick here. 25 gigabits per second would take 30 seconds. 40 gigabits per second would take about 20 seconds. 50 gigabits per second would take 15 seconds. 100 gigabits per second would take 7 seconds. 200 gigabits per second would take 3 seconds. And 400 gigabits per second would take 1 second. Could you imagine downloading all of GTA 5 in 1 second? That's kind of mind-blowing to me. There'd essentially be no progress bar at all. You would hit download and it would be done. obviously assuming that, everything was perfect and there was no hiccups or slowdowns or anything like that, which realistically there would be, but for the sake of argument, say there isn't, that's kind of insane. So for all those plebs out there talking about their 10 gig switches that they got in their house, they ain't got nothing on these data centers with 400 gigabits per second, let me tell you. So my 400 gigabit switch is coming in next week. I will update you when that comes. Just kidding, I don't have that kind of money. Now, the funny thing is, the internet has kind of exploded over the past few years, and nowadays 400 gigabits per second switching is not even the fastest that exists. We are now at 800 gigabits per second, so things definitely do change in just a matter of a couple short years. And yes, unfortunately, I still have not gotten my 400 gigabit switch. Sad face. But moving into the next clip, this is probably one that I'm fairly, infamous for maybe. Probably because it's made numerous reoccurrences on the podcast, and that is the RHEL Infinite Money Glitch that I dubbed it, or the Red Hat Enterprise Linux Infinite Money Glitch. So I'm going to play the first occurrence of it just to remember back where it all started. And this came from the episode titled RHEL's Infinite Money Glitch, Outsmarting SBF, Our Framework's Programming Languages, Operation Core Dump, and this was episode 35. You can actually create a developer account on their website, and they'll allow you to have up to 16 RHEL instances, which is pretty good. So you can test and develop your code and all that stuff. But the one thing that's kind of annoying about it is you have to have an account in order to download the ISO in the first place. And I wanted to download the ISO because I wanted to play with Red Hat, but I didn't want to create an account. So what I did was I remembered that another thing that I set up a while ago was DuckDuckGo's private email thing. I forget exactly what they call it. But basically what it allows you to do is you can create a @duck email address, which basically just forwards to whatever your personal email address is. And then they offer a service for free that you can generate essentially random email addresses that'll auto forward to your personal address. So I was like, this seems like a pretty good use for that then, because I don't want to make an account. So what I did was I went over to DuckDuckGo, created, a random email address that'll link to my personal email address, created an account with that, and then in doing this, I kind of realized something. I was like, wait a second, there's an infinite money glitch type thing going on here. I don't even have to create a bunch of fake email addresses. I could literally just, refresh the DuckDuckGo random address, copy that, create a new account with a bunch of random data, since it's not like they checked any of it aside from my email, which it's a different email from the one I used before, but it's going to my same personal email address. So I could literally make as many of these accounts as I want to get as many accounts as I want times 16 instances of Red Hat. So I could basically have as many as I want for free. So that's the first part of this infinite money glitch. But it goes deeper than that, because one thing that I tested in my experimenting around with this was I installed it into a VM, registered it to the account, and which actually, let me back up one step. I did actually create a second account with another randomized DuckDuckGo address, and it worked fine. So I could literally just keep doing this over and over and over again and have as many as I want. But back to the second part of this. So I created a VM in Proxmox, and I registered it to my account, the random account that I made, and I got it set up so I could, download packages and install packages and all that stuff. And then I converted the VM to a template. So basically what that would allow me to do was just like clone it around as many times as I want, and I wouldn't have to worry about reinstalling Red Hat or anything like that. So what I found rather interesting was I had the template, and then I cloned it once, and then I cloned it again, and I cloned it a third time. So I had 3 different instances of Red Hat. So I figured, this would add, 3 new licenses to that. So in the Red Hat dashboard, you can basically see like how many subscriptions you have, and it basically shows you all the systems that are registered to your account for the Red Hat licensing. It's like I mentioned, you could have up to 16. And what I found rather interesting was, so as I mentioned, I made 3 clones of that original VM that I registered. And none of those 3 VMs showed up in the Red Hat dashboard. So peculiar. And then the third VM, I went a step further and changed the hardware configuration, changed the number of cores, changed the number of memory, and, did this multiple times and still never showed up. So it seemed that I created this template that was registered, and now it seems like I can just clone this as many times as I want to make as many Red Hat instances as I want, and it's never going to add any more, instances of me registering, quote unquote, a new instance of Red Hat, which I find absolutely crazy. I don't know if that's a bug or a feature, but to me, it's definitely a feature. Now, as you heard there, I did have to cut out some of that segment just for time purposes. But needless to say, there was more in there, kind of going into the weeds a little bit more. But in the episodes and years since then, I've discovered the glitch goes further, and it's not related strictly to virtual machines. You can use like cloning software to clone hard drives from like virtual machines to physical disks and install them on physical disks, and it still works all the same. So if you clone one of these virtual machines onto real hardware, no new devices get added to your account, which is honestly insane. The next one is also from the first year of the podcast, and I happen to have a little mishap happen at my house, and it made my Xserve feel rather inadequate. So I will just let past me take it away, and this came from Not All Multi-Threading is Created Equal from episode 40. This week, I got to experience one of the biggest negatives of living with a full-blown data center in your house without any of the positives. Now, I would say all of the negatives without any of the positives, but I didn't have anything break on me. Well, I guess something technically did break on me, but it wasn't anything to do with my homelab, and it wasn't this week. But you know what? Let me just show you, or I guess let you listen to what's going on and let you kind of gather what I'm talking about here. So I am currently upstairs right now in my home office where my server rack sits, and I'm not sure if you're able to hear it or not, but I'm standing literally right next to it. I'll give you a second to maybe listen to see if you can hear it. So it's there, but once like the AC or the heat kicks on, it's just absolutely covered by that, and all I hear is the AC. Now, granted, the Xserve isn't turned on, but I have a question for you guys. Why is it that it's so quiet in here, but then as I move throughout my house, going down to the main floor, as you can hear, there is a lot of fan noise? And no, I did not get a second server rack to be on the main floor. And as you can hear now, as I step into the bathroom, there is definitely a lot of fan noise. Now, I wish that this was a new server rack and new data center that I got installed, but alas, it's not. So if any of you can enlighten me as to why my server rack and data center upstairs is so darn quiet, even though I'm running enterprise gear compared to this bathroom, I would greatly appreciate it. So as you could definitely hear there, my homelab got absolutely embarrassed in the noise compartment. It's probably, at the time, it was probably, walking around like a dog with its tail between its legs because of how embarrassed it was. But now the question becomes, I've mentioned before how loud my Xserve is. Is it possible that my Xserve can bring my homelab up to snuff and give it and, be what it takes for my homelab to take back the crown and be the loudest thing in my house? Well, I'll let you be the judge of that. All right, so now I'm definitely certain that you can hear my homelab right now. I have booted up my Xserve, and it is currently idling right now, as you can definitely hear. But the strange thing, and I can't believe I'm saying this, if we walk outside of my office here, and we enter into the rest of my house, and as we start going down the stairs, the Xserve becomes inaudible because of the other fans currently running in my house. And again, I wish this was another data center, but alas, it is not. So I cannot believe I'm saying this right now, but my Xserve is actually pretty darn quiet compared to the other fans currently running in my house. So I don't know, maybe I'll just have to keep my Xserve on all the time now because in comparison, it's pretty darn quiet. So yeah, my Xserve was pretty darn quiet to that data center wannabe that was in my house. So basically what happened was when I was off on vacation, sometime when I was away on Christmas, there was a pipe that kind of blew up in my wall in my bathroom down there. So they brought in those like big industrial fans to like air everything out. It's dry now. It's all good. Well, the house is still a little bit of a mess, but that's not exactly a nerdy thing. The reason I brought this up was because I thought it was funny that, you talk about enterprise servers, they're kind of known to be like these really loud machines, yet they basically sounded like passively cooled mini PC systems or Raspberry Pis or something when compared to those fans, which I thought was kind of funny. What was not kind of funny was having to live with those fans for a few days. But it's all good now. Everything's back in order. But the next clip I want to revisit was some more cybersecurity shenanigans that I got up to. Now, it's no secret that I sometimes like to pen test things and see where I can break things. So this was another example of me bypassing certain restrictions. This comes from the episode Ventura Install Take 2 GitHub Copilot lawsuit updates, bypassing corporate USB restrictions, Operation Core Dump, and this is from episode 42. One thing that's pretty common in corporate environments is to have USB devices pretty much locked down. You might be able to read from USBs, but writing to them is pretty much a no-go unless you have like a corporate USB. Now, this story comes from years ago. Basically, I was an intern at the time, and I noticed this. So this is basically a workaround that I found to allow you to write things to a USB even if your computer has the USB write capability disabled. Now, by this time, this was like super early into my home labbing, when I started home labbing, which I didn't know it at the time, and I didn't realize that's what it was called, but I was. So basically, I had the company laptop. And I tried to plug a USB drive in there to get some stuff off of my laptop, and it didn't work. And I wasn't sure why. And I was trying to figure out because even at the time I was, I did have some cyber background, but not as much in as much as, watching out for my own personal security and stuff. At that time, I was really into how can I break something? How can I get around how can I don't know if I'd say hack is the right word, but, how can I subvert, the rules in place to do what I want a thing to do? So the reason why this came up was because I mentioned I was across the country. The place I was, and because it was just for the summer, it's not like I was renting a house or anything. I was basically staying in one of those extended stay hotel places with a little suite type thing that had a super tiny kitchen and a bed and a couch, and that was basically it. And the internet was about a megabit down on a good day. So really terrible internet. And my home server had a bunch of DVDs that I had ripped so I could have my Plex library. But obviously, I wasn't streaming anything on that terrible internet. So I wanted to get my movies so I could have them with me locally on one of my personal machines, so I could watch them. Because at that time I had my Mac Mini, so that I had hooked up to the TV that was in the room. So what I wanted to do was get my movies on my Mac Mini so I could watch the movies on the TV. But because the internet was so bad, it's not like I could stream them from my house or my parents' house at the time. So the only way to do that was to get my movies. Now, obviously, I can't connect one of my personal laptops to the internet at the office because they wouldn't be able to connect because they don't have their credentials. So the way I got around that was I used my work laptop connected to the internet because, by the way, their internet I think they had was blazing fast. It was super quick. So basically, I got the movies on there. Then it was a matter of how do I get them off? Which, as you can already hear, this was a very stupid thing of me to do, so I do not recommend anyone doing this. Please don't do this. Please don't be dumb like me. But I'm just doing this for an example of how you can get around the USB restrictions. So I got the movies that I wanted, and then it was a matter of how to get them off. And that's kind of where I discovered I could not write to my USB drive. Now, I did have the option to make virtual machines, so I got a thought. One thing you can do with VirtualBox, and you can also do this with VMware and I'm sure other virtualization technologies, is you can pass through devices from your host operating system into the virtual machine. Now, if you pass a device into the virtual machine doesn't have any kind of restrictions on that device. Meaning, if you have a file in the virtual machine, and you can write it to the USB drive, no problem if you pass the USB drive through. So, yeah, you can't write anything to the USB drive if it's connected to your host operating system, but if it's passed through to the virtual machine, you can write to it all day long. Now, anyone that's dealt with virtual machines might see the solution already. But for those that don't see the solution, another thing you can do with virtual machines is you can pass through folders and share folders from your host machine with the virtual machine. So now you might be able to see what the solution is. So basically what you do is you plug your USB drive into your computer, pass the USB drive to the virtual machine, And then wherever the data is on your machine that you want to get off your machine but can't because write restrictions to the USB drive, you take that folder, pass it through to the virtual machine, and then use the virtual machine as the middleman to take the files from your host machine and write them to the USB drive. And it worked. It worked really good. So that is probably one of my all-time favorite stories that I even continue to tell to this day. Now, of course, like some of the other stories that we've touched on and will continue to touch on in the future, I did have to cut out a decent amount of that for time. Even though that was a very long clip, I did cut out a good chunk of it for time. So if you're interested, I highly encourage you to actually go back and listen to the full episode. But the next one I want to touch on is very reminiscent of where we are in today's world, which is the whole AI craze. Well, in Pokemon games, the AI is pretty dumb. And I had a episode where I cheesed the AI quite hard, and that is this next clip from the episode Cheesing AI, How Shuffle Works, Tech News Lightning Round, Operation Core Dump, episode 46. So the AI was a fighting type specialist, I guess you could say, and I had a psychic type as my first Pokemon out. Now, we mentioned the whole super effective versus, resistant type thing. Psychic, if you're unaware, is super effective against fighting. So I obviously had the advantage here, but that's not how I cheesed the AI, because that's just, simple, I have the upper hand because my type's better. But how I cheesed them was the Pokemon they started with knew a move called Sucker Punch. Now, Sucker Punch is a move that has priority, which means it goes first. So it doesn't matter if you're faster than them, they go first. And it's a dark type move, and dark is super effective against psychic. So they obviously were making the smart move here of using the dark type move that's super effective and will deal more damage against my psychic type. Now there's a catch, because Sucker Punch is great if the opponent is actually using an attacking move. So Sucker Punch only hits if the opponent is planning on attacking. So if I have a Pokemon out and I'm trying to use Sucker Punch on my opponent, if they're using some non-damaging move like Tail Whip or something that doesn't actually deal damage, Sucker Punch is going to fail. And the other thing with Sucker Punch is it only has 5 PP, which means it has five uses of it before you have to use either some kind of healing move to restore the PP or go to the Pokemon Center and heal your Pokemon. So because I know this, I put the cheese, I brought out the cheese, and I should have had some crackers, because there was, which I honestly probably wouldn't have even had enough crackers because of how much cheese there was. But basically, they tried to use Sucker Punch for 5 turns in a row. And for 5 turns in a row, it failed, because I decided to set up like crazy and go for 5 turns of Calm Mind, which boosts my special attack as well as my special defense. And because the majority of psychic moves, not all of them, but the majority of them use the special attack stat, and specifically my Pokemon was a special attacker and was going to be using a special attack type move, I'm basically just making myself invincible so I can just one-hit literally their entire team. And that's basically what I did. And by the way, keep in mind, the Pokemon that I was using was at least 5 or 6 levels under-leveled compared to the AI. So they're, trying their best to hit their Sucker Punch, and I'm just like, hey man, you're just gonna Sucker Punch, I'm just gonna keep Calm Minding. And then after the 5 turns are up, I decided to break out my broom and start sweeping. So that's what I did. I swept their entire team. Now, like some of the other clips, there is more to that one if you're interested in hearing the full thing, but that's kind of the main meat and potatoes of it, if you will. The next one I want to touch on is you guys have heard how I've praised on numerous occasions how you do not want to be the, oh, it works on my machine kind of guy. But there was one time where I actually became the, oh, it works on my machine kind of guy. And there is audio proof of it, which is this next clip, which comes from Hardware Considerations when Sourcing a Server for Your homelab, episode 52. I have to come to you guys and repent for my sins because as much as I like to hate on and joke about the it works on my machine guy, I basically turned into the it works on my machine guy this week. Now, before I walk away in shame and get burnt at the stake for my heresy, allow me to first take some copium while I try to justify to myself and to you, as Obi-Wan said, I became the very thing I swore to destroy. Now, I was doing a software delivery this week, and my code, of course, because I am talking about it worked on my machine, was working, at least I thought. So I delivered the code, and then the tester that was testing the code responded back to me and was like, hey, so I found this bug, and you know, they listed through, hey, I found this bug, and kind of went through like this, which I believe we've talked about on the podcast before, how important it is when you are reporting bugs or fixing bugs or whatever, to be as detailed as possible when reporting bugs to software devs. Because if you just say, hey, code no work, fix it please, the dev's gonna, be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then so the more specific you can be, if you can really drive down and say, hey, when I gave XYZ input on this interface, it gave me, Z, or I think I already used Z, it gave me W output, and basically as specific as you can be, because that's what allows you as a developer to really be able to pinpoint where in the code the bug is coming from. But on the flip side, though, if someone finds a bug in your code and for whatever reason you can't replicate it, you shouldn't just, throw your hands up and be like, oh, well, that sounds like a you problem, buddy. It works fine for me. It works on my machine. So that's obviously something that you don't want to do either. Issue, because just like in the real world, if your house is dark and there's a bug in your house, the chances of that you're going to find the bug and squash the bug and get rid of it is probably pretty low. Just like if you are a software developer and a person tells you that there is a bug but doesn't give you any more details, there's no light being shined about this bug at all, it's going to be pretty hard for you to find that bug. Sure, you might be able to track it down, but the more light you can shine on the area, more light you can shine on the code, more light you can shine in your house, the more likely you're going to see that bug, and the more likely you're going to be able to squash it and get rid of it. Because while some bugs can be a feature, and some people would argue that it is not a bug, it is a feature, some are just straight up bugs, and you gotta get rid of them. So that's gonna do it for this week's segment of those core modules. Now, of course, in that segment there, I did keep kind of going on and on about bugs, but next week you're going to want to tune in, because we start off next week with some clips from our conversation that we had with DOS Dude 1. So you'll definitely want to make sure you come back for next week to tune into that episode. But before we go for today, because this is a semi-normal episode, let's revisit our trivia question for the week. So this week's trivia question is, in the context of cloud computing, what does HPC stand for? If you said high performance computing, congratulations, you got this week's trivia question correct. And if you enjoyed this week's episode, enjoyed any of the clips that we kind of revisited, hopefully some of those rang a bell, or if they didn't, I did leave the names of some of those episodes if you want to go check them out after this one. But definitely be sure to leave this show a rating and review, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And leave a comment below if you're on YouTube of what your favorite clip was, or if I left one out, although I might get to it in the next 2 episodes. But yeah, you could shoot me an email at contact@darkassassinsinc.com. There's a link for that down in the show notes below. And that's going to do it for me in this episode of the Dark Assassins podcast. Until next time, my fellow assassins, remember, bull nothing equals true. If action not equal to null, return true. I'll see you next time on the Dark Assassins podcast.